Everyone, welcome back to our second podcast. My name is Megan, and I have my sister Kaylee here with me today to get to be our listener. I'll be sharing some facts and history about a very popular resident of Myakka State Park. So let's go ahead and let's get into it today. So our most sought after must-see animal for Florida is the American alligator, which I think for most is no surprise. So we're going to chat a bit about the American alligator and share some of its cool history that it has with Myakka State Park.
Megan absolutely did not want to do the American alligator as the first animal. She's like, "It's really kind of basic, isn't it?" And I was like,
I
"Yes."
did think it
So
was a
let's just get
cliche.
it out of the way.
I did. I really wanted to kind of touch base on something else, but then I was like, whenever we think Florida, everyone thinks an alligator. Let's do it. And I am very glad I did. I have learned so many things that I didn't know. So it's a good thing. But basically, the American alligator is the most common in Louisiana with about 2 million alligators, and Florida has a little over 1.3 million living in just between these two states. Until learning this, I did think that Florida would have the most alligators. I thought that was a no-brainer, and I was very wrong. The average alligator can be anywhere from around 10 to 15 feet long. With most females, they do not exceed about 10 feet long. Most alligators are not going to weigh more than 500 pounds. You do see the occasional few that can actually get up, especially your 15-foot alligators that are going to go ahead and get up to that 1,000 pounds, which I think is absolutely crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, like I know they're big, but usually animals are like they're big, but they
They
don't
always
weigh
seem lighter
nearly
than
as
what you
much.
actually think they are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they're like solid.
Very solid. And it's crazy, even the bigger ones, they are still very much so able to get up and move. Like, they swim great, and they can get on land, and they can hustle. So it's crazy. The first 4 to 6 years of their life, they are going to grow about a foot per year, and then this growth is going to start slowing down, and typically by the time they hit the age of 20, their growth has typically already has stopped, or it's going to come to a halt at this point. With the American alligator, if you ever see an alligator resting on the surface and you can only see the snout and its eye, you can actually estimate how big the alligator is based on how many inches from the bump on the snout to its eye. A lot of us kind of go by that. You can just kind of base it by that inch, but it's basically based from that little bump that you can see when it's on that surface of the water. It looks like this basically, and then just from the snout to its eye.
It's always fun when you're like looking out in a body of water and you're like, "That's just a stick." No, that's a gator. It's just a
No,
little bump sticking up.
it moved, and not like a stick would move. If you ask almost any Floridian, we will say that alligators live in almost any body of water. They do tend to travel quite a bit. It's pretty common. They'll move from one body of water to the next, but they typically prefer to be in freshwater rivers, swamps, marshes, lakes, and wetlands, or any wetland basically. The American alligator is a reptile that prefers and does its best in the water, but like I said, they will travel for their food, and that food consists of fish, frogs, little baby turtles, birds, and sometimes other mammals. Alligators typically prefer to keep their distance from humans. They're not considered, or they're not relatively the most dangerous of wildlife. And what typically makes them dangerous is humans. We do that. And so because of this, that's kind of what gives them that edge. And oh, alligators are terrifying, but really it's humans developing and people feeding them that really starts to kind of cause the issue.
I feel like
Okay.
it's the videos that you see or like the news stories are the worst. I mean, it's like anything. It's the worst case scenario. It's a kid getting snatched up by the edge of a pond. But that's not exactly natural alligator behavior. They don't really hunt people. They will hunt animals and mammals at the edge of a pond. Like if there's a raccoon or a possum at the edge, they'll grab it. Sometimes if they're big enough, even like a deer or something, like at the edge of the water, and then they drag it down and drown it. And if they're getting used to people being around, then sometimes that happens with dogs or even small kids, which is
Yeah,
really sad.
exactly. When people start feeding them, they start to expect that handout. And if done consistent enough, the alligator is, like I said, it's going to expect that. So when people are approaching the edge of water, there's a gator, they start swimming closer. You know, typically that means that it's going to be expecting something. Alligators typically do not want to come closer to people. But basically, because of people feeding them, they they stop traveling as much. They can expect handouts, but something to also keep in mind with that is when people are feeding them, you are typically not seeing the same alligator that you see in like your local community. That community body of water that you typically see every single day. If you see an alligator and you come back a couple months later, it's typically not that same alligator. They're going to travel for wherever their food is, and if we keep feeding them, they're going to stay put instead of traveling, and they're just going to get too comfortable. And we don't really want them to be comfortable, and that kind of goes without saying for all wildlife. We should not be feeding alligators, and we should not be feeding the squirrels or any other cute wildlife that we think needs to be fed. There is food, there's lots of it, there's enough. Let's not feed our wildlife.
Yeah, this is a rant I will go on happily at any time. Do not feed the wildlife. It can get really dangerous when you're talking about feeding something like a black bear or a gator, and you look at the stats like, well, they don't usually attack people. No, they don't. But when they do, it's because they've gotten used to people, and it's because there's been food involved. And basically, what you're doing is you're signing that animal's death certificate. If they get comfortable around people, even if they don't cause an attack or something, you're going to get them put down because they're going to become a danger. And it seems harmless to feed things like squirrels and raccoons and stuff, but hey, it's just incredibly unhealthy for them to not be hunting and doing their food source. But same thing, you're going to get them trapped and taken out of these campgrounds and out of these areas. So just don't do it. It doesn't help. Anyway,
Exactly. Well
sorry,
said.
back to gators.
That's it. It's like I said, well said. Exactly. Now, something that I didn't know about the American alligator is that, when they reproduce similar to turtles, meaning the females, once they reach maturity, that's anywhere from around 10 to 15 years, they are going to build a mound. And that mound usually consists of soil, vegetation, any debris that's around in that area that they choose. Now, in that mound, they're going to deposit about 32 to about 46 eggs in typically late June or early July. And that typically means that mating season is going to start end of April and be through May. Now, something to kind of keep in mind during mating season and during the season of laying these eggs, gators become a little bit more territorial, which is completely understandable and expected. They have females are laying their eggs, those are going to be their little babies. They're going to get more protective, and as people, we should be more aware of where we're going in bodies of water and how close we're getting to the edge of the water. Just look at your surroundings and be mindful, especially during these seasons. I mean, really, we should be doing it at all times, but just be mindful.
I remember as a kid, everyone was like, June 1st, you got hurricane season, and you got to watch extra for the gators. And I was like, yeah, all right.
Yeah, they go hand in, which is crazy. They actually go so hand in hand. It's really fascinating. I think it's fascinating.
It's probably like by design, or
I
like
think so.
through
I
evolution,
think
like it
so.
makes sense.
Mother Nature has to play its part, of course, we all know that, and then it's just crazy. It's interesting. But basically, those 32 to 46 eggs, they're going to incubate for about 63 to 68 days, and basically, those baby alligators, once they start hatching, they are going to be turned out to be little fall babies, because they are going to start hatching around mid-August through early September.
Virgo, Scorpios.
Yeah, I was gonna say it. Yeah. Alligator nests, or like their mounts, they also have similar survival rates like turtles. So typically about a third of alligator nests are destroyed by predators, which surprisingly enough, the main predator was raccoons and flooding.
Okay.
Which I also find the flooding super interesting. It kind of goes back to Mother Nature doing its part. And also the timing is because June, we say, hey, keep an eye out. But from June until basically November is hurricane season for Florida. So that is prime rain season, prime hurricane season, and lots of flooding. And it makes sense about why, like, 1/3 of those nests are going to be destroyed. And by the main, it's going to be raccoons and any flooding that's going to happen.
I think it's also fun to think about, like, oh, what's the biggest danger to the gator population? Raccoons. I mean, and that's not true. Like, it's really development, but still, like,
But still,
what's the biggest predator? Raccoons.
raccoons just munching on some eggs. Yeah, just a little raccoon. Yeah, I agree. I felt the same way when I was reading that too. And then I also found it interesting that it's flooding because that's prime hurricane season
Yeah,
typically
gators
for
are
Florida.
in water.
Yeah. So out of those 30 or so eggs that are laid, only 10 of those are going to make it to a year old. And then half of that, so about 5, were actually going to make it to what it's called sub-adults, which is when they reach maturity of about 6 feet in length.
Okay.
So, not necessarily the greatest odds for them, but they're still reproducing enough that it's still contributing to the population each year. So, it's not too much of a concern. It's kind of expected. So, that is basically just kind of the brief overview of the American alligator, what they eat, their habitat, kind of what they do. I wanted to go ahead and share some of the American alligator's history that it has. So, currently, the American alligator is not part of the Endangered Species Act, which is great. However, due to the early 1900s, gators became extremely popular and was in very high demand. There was lots of illegal hunting that was taking place, especially from around 1966 to 1970, where in 1971 you see a major decrease of about 140 illegal hides that was just bought by a single buyer in Florida. Now, prior to that, that single buyer in Florida, um, basically 1967 had killed slash bought 17,000 alligator hides that were all legal hides. Like they just basically anything that was there was free game. So that's around 17,000 in 1967. 1968 with around 13,000. 1969 with around 16,000. And so after 1969, we slowly start to decrease a little bit, with 1970 coming in with about 11,000, which is absolutely crazy when you remember that, again, this was just one illegal buyer. Um, it is estimated from 1965 to 1971, 140,000 hides were moved out of Florida. And this is just kind of what's recorded. Um,
Right.
it could be, honestly, it's kind of expected to be a little bit more. But I think it's absolutely insane that
The
almost half of
17,000,
that was one person.
yeah, that
Or
17,000
probably
is
one
like
group.
so much, and then that's just one part of it. So like that's a lot of gators. That's a lot of recorded gators because if there's that much getting recorded, there's
Exactly.
a whole lot more that's not getting recorded. And also, that's not that long ago. Like I think about bad environmental stuff and I think about like the 20s and 30s and like how many birds went extinct so women could have feathers in their hats or the like fur trades and stuff so that everyone could have mink coats. But like no, that's our grandparents like coming into
Yeah, no,
adulthood generation time. Like
it's
that's
not that
not that
far.
long
I
ago.
think that's like less than like what, 50, less than 50 years?
Yeah, about, yeah. I'm not great at math in
1967
my
was
head.
like the big start of it, so
Yeah.
give or take a bit. Yeah, it's crazy. But I mean, of course, 140,000 estimated in a year, that of course put them through that it put them on the Endangered Species Act. So in 1967 they were added to the list, and mind you, again, those numbers that I just read off, those really started from around 1965. So even once they were added onto the list in 1967, it did take several years for those numbers to actually start decreasing, and they didn't start decreasing by a great amount until 1971 or so. And still, it was still a little bit too high for the fact that the American alligator was so close to just going to be extinct in a couple more years. So, like I said, they were put on the list in 1967. They were able to be removed in 1987, which was only about 20 years. So I don't think that's the longest time frame ever. I think that's actually a pretty decent time frame.
I mean, there's
So
definitely
they were
plenty of
protected.
animals that haven't come off the endangered species list that have
Yeah,
been on
since
it
it
just as long. I just looked it up. I didn't
exactly.
realize that I realized, but I didn't put it in context with like a timeline. But the Environmental Protection Agency wasn't started until 19.
Yeah, exactly. So I think with the fact that it wasn't started till 1970, it was late 70 or late 60s, early 70s that they really got put on it. I think recovering that in about 20 years, I feel like it's a really good timeline,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of glad to see it. Um, But because
Dirty
they were able
eggs
to be removed
coming out.
in 1987, we now have hunting regulations and other rules that were put in place. And so, present day, we have those laws and regulations in place to hopefully prevent the American alligator from nearly going extinct. A little bit of insight in some of these regulations that have been put in place. For Florida specifically, this is from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation. The statewide recreational alligator hunting season is going to run from around August 15th through November 8th each year. And essentially, Florida uses or has harvest units. And in these harvest units, there are 63 harvest units that hunters are eligible to apply for. And then within that, they are permitted to basically hunt only in that lake or section of river or
Okay, so a
whatever body of water that they have access
harvest
to.
unit is like an area.
Exactly. So it's just going to be, it's some counties have several, some counties only have one, and it can only be specific areas. There's a lot of limitations. And like I said, you can get more information for Florida Fish and Wildlife if you're kind of curious on how that breaks down per each county. Because that there's in Florida, there's only about 63 harvest units that those hunters they're eligible for. It does make it a bit competitive because they're broken down during or based between each county. Based on that harvest unit, that location, there may be certain time frames or how long the hunters can be out hunting for, just to kind of help prevent, they're not spending more than 24 or 48 hours out there at one time, which is helpful. So these are numbers based from 2024. The projected number of permits for alligator hunting season for Sarasota has 6 available permits, and Manatee County has about 93 available permits.
Crazy.
I mentioned Sarasota and Manatee County just because that's where we grew up. Those are our 2 biggest counties that we were always in, and
Well,
so
that's
between these 2 counties, they
the
have less
history
than
we were
100.
talking about earlier this week on
Yeah.
the show was this area. So that's pretty cool.
So just a little under 100 permits available. Sarasota having less, most likely, because Myakka State Park does reside mostly in Sarasota. And so that is home to quite a few alligators each year. And Manatee County has a little bit more that are available with more areas that are able to, more
More
areas in
huntable
the
areas.
units. Exactly. So
That's why all those alligator hunting shows on the History Channel happen in Louisiana.
probably.
I only ever see them like hanging out at a brewery and it's on the background.
Right. So, I mean, basically with this, we have Florida has put in some regulations to help, eliminate hunting as being the biggest threat to the to alligators. Now, currently, our biggest threat, can I kind of touch base on this, was that loss of habitat is currently our biggest threat to them. We're currently developing very, very quickly. Anyone from Florida is going to tell you that we're developing quickly, which is not necessarily a problem. Development can be great, but development is currently a huge threat to the American alligator. It's super important that we keep our state parks a safe place for the American alligator and wildlife in general. And helping of doing that is just preventing, super simple, let's not put golf courses in our state parks. We really don't want to take away from wildlife by putting in a golf course. Wildlife need
And
these
so like
resources,
development,
and
I was going to say development causes a couple different problems. So first of all,
this
you're
is a
going to
lot,
be
yeah.
draining like land that is lowland, that's swampland, that's like you're draining their habitat, you're putting houses on it, and then you're replacing all of that usable land with like a retention pond. And gators, while they are in the water, a lot of the time they're also land dwelling, so they need that mix of both. We also covered how much they travel. So now they're traveling, it's going to be going between these neighborhoods, and they have to cross roads, and they have to cross highways, and they have to cross golf courses, and all of these things, not to mention like the runoff and the way that that's going to affect the water quality if there's like roads cutting through all these spaces. So it's not just gators that like development will affect, but it is important, like, we understand like there's going to be houses and people need places to live and all of that. So that's not really the problem as much as like how is it being done? Where is it being done? And are we still maintaining our wild spaces, our national forests, our preserves? What land can we keep set aside? Keep it as wetland and not drain it, because that is what Florida is intended to be. That's what Florida is. That's how the environment works. That's how the wildlife, the unique and like diverse wildlife that we have, needs that space.
Exactly. And I think that's a rant that Kayla and I are very happy to go on about. And if anyone has questions, we are definitely happy to explain that rant and rant again about it, I promise you. But basically, talking about our state parks and preventing golf courses and different things like that, and keeping our state parks a safe space for our wildlife and specifically for today, the American alligator. The American alligator is a very popular resident of Myakka State Park.
Yeah.
So, the park has over 37,000 acres and is part of a conservation area within Sarasota and Manatee counties. Myakka State Park is home to about 4,000 alligators year-round, which I thought was a lot. I feel like that's a decent amount. So, within Myakka State Park, you're able to take boat tours within the park to see gators. They're also known for having quite a bit of birds, specifically like water birds. There's a lot of bird watching that you can do. Different things like that. They do offer those boat tours given that Florida weather prevents. As anyone may know, it can be a bit temperamental sometimes. But really, home biggest thing is that Myakka State Park is home for our American alligators. Myakka State Park is especially known for something called the deep hole, that during the season when all of the other parts of the park have started to dry up because of our dry season, and that starts to eliminate food resources for the American alligator. Honestly, it kind of eliminates a lot of resources for a lot of the wildlife that lives in Myakka State Park. Your fish population starts to decrease. The plants that grow, that can grow from all the water, that starts to decrease. It kind of all just starts to dry out.
Yeah, can I say something like the Myakka River is very wide and fairly shallow. And the whole area around here is basically a floodplain, which I mean a lot of Florida is. But it's really interesting when you get a lot of rain coming in, you'll be driving through and what was a cow pasture is now completely flooded and looks like a lake. And that's how Florida is meant to be. That's part of what made the area, like this area, Myakka area, so rich for like all the settlers early on, is that it has that pattern of flooding like that and depositing the silts and all of the stuff. And then when it gets the dry season, it recedes. Plants are able to grow and take over, and that's what makes the area so great for like agriculture and stuff.
Exactly. So basically, because of this, the deep hole is a great spot for the American alligator to go ahead. It provides them food, provides them with enough water because of the deep hole. And if anyone's wondering, it's extremely deep, hence the name. Typically, it's been reported that you can see anywhere from around 50 to 200 gators laying out on the banks while everything else starts to dry up. The deep hole does dry up a bit. Yep, you're going to lose a couple feet because of Florida and it's drying, which is fine. But there's still so much water, and because of how deep it is, it gives them a great resource.
And so, what is deep hole exactly?
Yeah, so while doing my deep dive on Myakka State Park, that is where I actually learned that the deep hole is actually from a sinkhole, which is absolutely crazy to me because until I started doing this research and started trying to learn some more, I had no idea that the deep hole is a sinkhole originally. It's a very, very old sinkhole. It was actually a little difficult to kind of find some information, exact dates of when the sinkhole first came and what necessarily caused the sinkhole itself. It was a little difficult to find that information.
Not really within like written history, like in the last 200 years. Like it's old,
it's
right?
old. It has been around for a while, to say the least. Crazy enough, it's not Florida's biggest sinkhole, which I was absolutely appalled by. Hopefully, I will go over actually our biggest sinkhole in probably a later episode because I was also shocked to learn that it was something that I most likely have seen on a regular or almost every trip I take. I was seeing it in passing every time. So it's crazy. But the deep hole is about 295 feet wide and about 130 feet deep.
Massive.
Absolutely massive. It's huge. It is insane.
And deep hole is so descriptive. It is a hole.
What?
Deep hole is so descriptive, you know?
Yeah, I find it so interesting because they're like, oh, you can go to it during the dry season. And I'm like, you're calling something the deep hole during the dry season. I don't know. I was just like, okay.
Like,
All right. How deep is this? How actually good is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's 130 feet deep. That's pretty good. I have a diagram here that I was supposed to share with Kaylee before recording this podcast so that she could look at this and you guys could kind of see Kaylee's reaction to everything I'm about to tell you, but I definitely forgot to email that to her.
So if you're on YouTube, we'll post that on there so you can see it.
We'll have
And
that
if
link
you're
so everyone
listening,
can go ahead and see it.
great plug to go to YouTube.
Exactly. There we go. It worked out. Basically, a breakdown of it is that the first 10 feet, kind of once you're off the banks and you kind of start going down, that first 10 feet is going to be where you have your fish, your vegetation, and everything seems normal. Everything's fine. It's not until you start to hit around 20 feet does it seem that 20 feet is kind of when it starts to get crazy. Basically, you hit what they call a dead zone because there is absolutely no oxygen. There is zero oxygen once you start hitting around 20 feet and going farther down. So
It seems so shallow
you get
to be a dead
no
zone.
oxygen. Exactly. And then you're going to turn around and you're going to hit 30 feet, and the water temperature is going to be around 57 degrees, if not colder. So extremely cold, and there's absolutely no life. It is what they call it the dead zone. There is no life. Plants, fish, nothing is growing, nothing is living, there's nothing there. So basically, what they say is that beyond 20 feet, there is no life. There is just about mounds of decomposition of fish, vegetation, and alligators, of course, that were basically too old or maybe ventured a little bit too far down and weren't able to make it back up. And because of how cold it is and the lack of oxygen, basically once everything starts to go down and they sink down slowly, and it hits the mound at the very bottom. So once you start hitting like your hundreds of feet, 130 feet or so, you basically just have mounds of decomposition. Like it's kind of a graveyard and water.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds like a fish and gator graveyard.
Exactly. It's a little gross to kind of think about. I'm very thankful that Myakka State Park, which of course there's gators, but you can't swim there, and I think it's a good thing because you'll be swimming in a little graveyard or a big graveyard. So it's a little crazy to me, I think, because they're basically and essentially because of how cold, because of the lack of oxygen, it takes a while for all these animals and anything that's down there to basically start decomposing. So
Okay,
it can
that makes
take
sense.
they expect it to take about thousands of years for everything to start decomposing. So like it is literally like a grave.
Oh, there's got to be some really interesting skeletons and fossils down there, and like
Yes.
bodies. But I
And the diagram
imagine,
kind of shows what they expect is down there and just that like they expect like they could bring things back up if they could. Like that's what's kind
you're
of
talking like
expected.
dinosaurs or like mastodons and stuff.
Well, it doesn't necessarily go that far because there's not really enough research about it.
Yeah,
But it is expected to be, like I said in the beginning, it's extremely old. So it is expected to be a lot.
several thousand years, or that's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
And because it
gators
takes
have
so
been
long, it kind
around
of
for
preserves them extremely well too, because of those two things combined. Now, because of this, or not necessarily because of this, but basically in 2012 is kind of what started the deep hole expedition, and that's where two divers, Jim Coulter and Kurt Bowen, they wanted to kind of figure this information out, figure out what was true, what it was like, just figure out how, and why. So what they went ahead and did is they put themselves in a makeshift shark cage that they ended up modifying for gators because they're a little bit different than sharks, and so they had to modify it a little bit more for alligators.
What do you have to change for gators?
So they didn't go too crazy. They have a huge report, and I'll have that shared. They didn't go crazy into the modifications that they put onto there, but they just stated that, they had to modify it. I imagine they had to kind of make smaller,
Yeah, more
as
narrow.
my guess, because gators' their faces and their snouts are so much narrower. Like they can probably fit into those small spaces much better than an alligator can or a shark
Yeah,
can.
that's interesting.
So I was hoping they would, and maybe I'll be able to find it, and hopefully if I do, I'll share the resources that I find with everyone. But basically, they took divers, those two divers went down, they used that short cage to go down, and they took cameras with them, and that's kind of how they got started originally, and that's what led them to get to the shark cages, was because every time they kept going down, they kept putting cameras down, they said there was about two gators especially that seemed that if it didn't move fast enough, they wanted to take a chomp out of the gear, out of any camera, which I get it. Like, there's an intruder in your water. Why not? Why not take a chomp
Well,
out of it?
flinty. Yeah.
Yeah, a little crunchy. So basically, the two gators, and that's what led them to that shark cage. And so they went down. That's where they started testing the oxygen levels, the water temperatures, what feet, just a bunch of different things. And like I said, I'll share that report so you guys can kind of read the nitty gritty and all the numbers. I won't kind of share that many numbers with you guys, but something to keep in mind is if anyone has spent some time in freshwater, we all know that the visibility is not always the greatest. So while they were trying to do this research and figure these things and learn all this, basically in that expedition, their range of view was about 1 to 2 feet in front of them. And they basically said that that was kind of on a good day.
I could see that, especially if that area, like, you don't have fresh water coming in. It's not spring fed, so you don't have clear
No,
fresh water. You have the same old water that is just filled with decay. And then
grave water.
that kind of water around here, especially like the Myakka River, it's brown. The only blue that the water looks as if the sky is like
It's just like from
reflecting
the
off of it.
top, and the sun's like super sunny, and it's
Yeah.
just hitting it just right. So it is, by
Otherwise,
any means, not pretty water, very hard to see. And like I said, during the dry season, you're seeing, and you could see anywhere from 50 to 200 gators, not to mention any just gators just hanging out in the water. So
it's like,
I can only kind of imagine how uneasy and very much on edge I would feel if I was doing that.
I picture is like, so the watercolor, if you're not familiar, is like sweet tea, coffee, like it's that dark. And then you're
With
gonna have
stuff
little
in it.
flecks of stuff
Yeah.
floating in it. So if you've ever, this is ironic from a Florida podcast, if you've ever driven in snow flurries and it just like little white things going by, I imagine that's what it's got to be trying to swim or direct a camera through it. Is you just have all these little floaties going by. I guess driving in fog could be comparable, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, snow. It's
Seems
okay.
like a very difficult project. You know what I also wonder, and this is slightly off topic, how many people before oxygen tanks and stuff were there and were like, well, I'm curious at how deep, we know it probably goes deep, how deep, and then got in and got down low enough to all of a sudden not have, well, I guess you don't have oxygen anyways when you're swimming, so maybe I'm dumb. That might be.
Well, I mean, I don't really know how it works. I do know the report goes down what like at all the levels and different things that they had. There was a lot of testing that was done. Not necessarily like testing on things, but just lots of reports that were done. I think it's super fascinating that I don't think 20 to 30, I know 20 to 30 feet is deep, but I don't think 20 to 30 feet is deep to basically no longer have oxygen and the temperatures are getting so cold. Which I mean, if there's no oxygen, it makes sense that it's getting cold. But
Yeah,
I just feel like that should be a little bit farther down. Like I feel like it's very
I feel like
interesting
people
and
free
kind of
dive
crazy.
deeper than that
Yeah.
fairly frequently. Not me.
Yeah.
I don't dive down more than 6 feet, but that's okay.
It's okay. I don't
Neither here
dive
nor
at
there.
all.
Anyways,
Exactly. But basically, that is the deep hole. It is absolutely insane. I think I kind of want to find out some more about the decomposition at the bottom. And like I said, it's a big graveyard essentially with a home to alligators. And so I think that's very fascinating and something I have gone to American State Park so many times and I never knew. But if anyone is interested and wanting to actually see it a little bit closer than just kind of, I believe, so basically, I believe from looking at the maps, you're actually able to view it from certain points in the park. But if you would actually like to be able to go to the deep hole, Myakka State Park actually allows about 30 permits per day. You do need to arrive relatively early. It is extremely competitive. Kaylee and myself, neither one of us have done it yet. I think honestly after this I'm really tempted to, but it is
you gotta
extremely
be.
competitive. They do 30 permits per day. You have to walk into it. Like I said before, there's absolutely no swimming. You have to keep your distance, but it is expected that you can typically see quite a few of alligators. And it can be a relatively pretty cool experience if you are good. If you like hiking, I know they allow people to bike to it, and so they keep it kind of restrictive just to make sure that everyone's coming in and coming back out
Yeah,
and
that
stuff.
habitat's really protected. It's a really important area. I have not been yet. I want to go. You should come down here on a
Yeah.
weekday at some point and we
I
should
know
do
we should do
it.
it together.
I've been trying to get into the park at 8 a.m. to get in to just do like hiking or get a camping permit and sat in that line and people start lining up like an hour early and by 8:10, whoever's made it through the park has taken up those 30 permits. So it is very, very competitive. You have to do it day of. You can't reserve it ahead of time or anything like that. But it's all for a really good reason. It's all to keep that area from getting inundated. I think it's like a 2-mile hike in. Um, I think there's an option to paddle to it. I think no matter what, though, you have to get a permit. So, but if you call and talk to the park rangers, and we've done it a couple times, we've done it for backpacking in Myakka State Park, and we've done it for like asking about the deep hole information. Park rangers are super, super helpful. They're great. Absolutely love Myakka State Park. It's like where I did my first backpacking trips. It's where we always went as kids. Although as kids, I always thought it was like our backyard, just with more rules.
Pretty much, honestly,
Which
yeah.
is kind of true, but it's gorgeous and it's a great place to see. I know you don't have to go to Deep Hole to see gators. You don't have
No,
to get on a boat tour there to see gators. You'll see more and you'll see different parts of the lake, and I highly recommend it. We actually did it one year as a surprise for Megan's like
we
12th
did.
birthday or something. But even if you just drive through the park, you'll probably see them. You'll probably see turkeys. You'll either see hogs or markings of hogs if you're there early in the day or later in the evening, like right before sunset, you'll probably see deer. But if you go up to the main area, and it's called the Pink Gator Cafe, I think. Um, they they sell drinks, they sell food, they have like a gator chili and fried gator bites, so you can taste some gator tail. But up there in that parking lot area, you can usually walk along one of the lakes. I don't remember if it's the Upper Lake or
There's
Lower
actually a little
Lake.
trail that you can get to now. I just recently went not too long ago, like probably a couple months ago. And there's actually a trail off of that parking lot that you can walk out to. It's very short, relatively really easy. If it's rainy, it is going to be very wet, very muddy, and usually it fills up more. But during the dry season, you can typically get to it. And usually, I mean, when
You
I
will
went
see
just a couple months
gators.
ago, I saw at least like 20 alligators sitting
I've
out
never
there.
not seen gators there and multiple.
Typically, there's a
Also,
park ranger sitting out there to answer questions,
yeah,
also making sure that we're respecting alligator space and their habitat and everything else, because again,
and
that's
it's a
very
beautiful
important.
spot there too to like bring a picnic lunch. Jared, my husband, and I, we've set up a slack line over there, which is always fun. But we've seen gators. We also always see like multiple water birds, like even roseated spoonbills. So like if you are a bird person, definitely go there. Like, and that's not even hiking. That's like getting out of the car and going and walking 20 feet over to the lake, and then you can see all these things. I'll see if I can find some pictures to post when we announce this episode, or share them on here. But we've gotten some great pictures of birds out there, and it's a beautiful place to be for sunset. There's also, if you keep driving a little closer to the south end, there's a bridge that you cross, and that's got one of the lakes there, and you'll always see people pulled over before and after that bridge. It's like around the area where the tower is, or the canopy walk. But around that area, there's a bridge, and there's always gators. That's a great place where you'll see
Nice.
them. You'll see the nose bump and the head bump, and you're like, oh, yep, that's a gator there. So
That's a
great
gator.
place for photography, whether you are a professional or just dabbling. Um, it's a lot of fun.
Lots of different things, and honestly, Myakka State Park is extremely accessible, and I really appreciate that for them. It's great that they're accessible for anyone, and like I said, because their most local resident or most common resident is the American alligator and that's what people are coming to see. It's pretty typical that you're going to see one. There's lots of different places for anyone to be able to hopefully see the alligator and stuff.
All right. Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please let us know. We're so excited to be doing this and bringing it to you. So, whether you are listening on Apple or Spotify, if you can leave us a 5-star review, that would be so helpful. If you can share with friends, follow our podcast, that way you'll get our uh, bi weekly updates of when new episodes are released on Mondays and Fridays. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. We're talking about getting a Patreon going, and something I could add on there specific to this episode is a couple different like backpacking plans. If you would be interested in backpacking in Myakka State Park, this is my stomping ground. So if that's something you guys might be interested in, let me know. That's something I could either share in like a video or on Patreon for everybody. So let us know what you guys are interested in. If you have any suggestions for wildlife you'd like us to cover, from mammals, reptiles, birds, spiders. We got lots of weird stuff here. Let us know what your Florida questions are. Share your Florida hiking and exploring stories. And if you've got any cool history stuff you want me to look into, let me know. All right. Happy
Thanks,
exploring.
everyone. Happy exploring.
Remember, there's probably a gator in that water.
There definitely is.
Right.